Okay, AP Euro students, welcome to your chapter 19, French Revolution and Rise of Napoleon. Let's get into it. Causes of the French Revolution. Obviously, we know cause and effect, very important to AP. Inequality and a very unfair social order, without a doubt. We have three estates. The first estate being the clergy, the second estate being the nobility, and the third estate being literally everyone else, which is about 97% of the population of France. You're talking, I think, 24 million people or something like that. It's insane how many people are in the third estate. These three social classes determine the person's status and their rights. Big problem is that number one and number two right here, they're not going to be paying taxes. All the taxes are going to be coming from number three. Number three ranges from farmers all the way up to doctors. So a huge issue here. Again, first estate, 1% of the population doesn't pay taxes. Second estate is the nobility, about 2% of the population, and they own 25% of the land. Who owns the rest of the land? Typically the church. They are in high positions in the government and the military, and they also do not pay taxes, a noble privilege. Third estate, the bourgeoisie, the middle-class professionals. You've got free peasants. You also have serfs, who are unfree peasants, are also in the third estate, and they all have to pay taxes. And France is in quite a bit of debt. Remember all the wars that Louis XIV engaged in. They've also sent way too much money to America for the American Revolution. And Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, spend money like it's going out of style. So we have some issues there. This guy, Jacques Necker, releases his report in 1781 saying everything's fine. But he does show that there is economic mismanagement, which upsets the people. And by 1786, 5 years later, banks are not going to lend France any money because they know they're not going to get their money back. France is just too bad in debt, and they're not paying off their debt. This guy, Charles Alexander Calonne, he has his economic reform plan says, hey, why not tax the landed nobility? Yeah, that gets him replaced very quickly. They see an issue, but the economic pinch, the nobles don't feel that quite as much as the common person does. And they're not about this radical reform of taxing the nobles. Certainly not going to do that. Marie Antoinette, definitely, she's going to get a nickname, Madame Deficit. She is not liked. She spends ridiculous amounts of money, as you can see there. A dress costing 20 times what a skilled worker would earn in an entire year. That's not even an unskilled worker. That's a skilled worker. Spent tons of money on clothes and shoes, accessories, parties, redecorating Versailles. Here she's aloof to the problems of the common people, and they despise her for it. Cost of living increases dramatically. You have a lot of inflation. Price of food rose, and you get crop failures in 88 and 89, which led to bread shortages. And when your children are starving to death, guess what? You're not going to take that very well. And the peasants of France are getting very unhappy with the government, with the clergy, who they feel are not protecting them in any way. So what are the causes of the French Revolution? Well, we have a few. Inequality of social class, as we talked about. The fact that only the third estate's being taxed. France is in debt. That's a huge problem. It's going to lead to the revolution. Marie Antoinette's and Louis XVI's extravagant spending, definitely a cause. Cost of living increases, tensions rise, no money or food for basic necessities. What do you got to lose? What are they going to do? Kill you? You're going to die anyway. And people are willing to rise up because of it. Let's skip a couple of these sort of worthless, extra slides, like how many brothers and sisters Marie Antoinette had, her wedding and coronation. Those things aren't really that important. Neither is this, but I just thought it was amusing. Louis XVI, described as homely and awkward, antisocial. For some reason, he's obsessed with keys and clocks, collecting them and stuff. He ignores Marie Antoinette for 7 years of their marriage. That does actually have a little bit of importance because here she is in a new land. She's not French, And what's she going to do? Well, she's going to spend money to distract herself from being lonely, basically. So she's going to do all that, and so he has a little bit of a role to play. She's controversial. Decided to act in the theater, which was considered scandalous for a queen. She's a trendsetter, wears stupid hats. Um, obviously they have children. Okay, so that's our setup. All right, 6 phases of the French Revolution. We're going to give that a 10-year period from 1789 to 1799, and then Napoleonic era takes on over that after that for 16 years. 6 phases. Well, the first phase, 1789, is the Estates General. Then we get the National Assembly phase. These are all different governments. The French Revolution is a little bit crazy. And then the National Assembly gets traded in for the Legislative Assembly, which gets traded in for the National Convention, which gets traded in for the Directory phase, which is Napoleon and some others running show, and then the Napoleonic phase. Let's go through them. All right, States General. Problem is you get 1 vote per state. 1 vote per estate right there. And the first and second tend to go together to always defeat the third estate. So the third estate allowed to send as many delegates as the other 2 states combined. That's a solution to it. That's an issue. That's a reform measure, if you will. All right. 1789, Joseph Sieyès wrote his pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? And argued that the clergy and nobility contributed little to the country. The third estate, however, he believed was the heart of the country. And you can see in this very famous political cartoon here, the king, the first and second estates are riding on the back of the enslaved third estate here. And they're dressed nice and, the poor third estate right there. So all are invited to submit their grievances and petitions. The petition showed a desire for constitutional monarchy, sort of what Britain has, a monarch that is limited by, a noble branch. Restructured tax system, they want that. And they want guaranteed liberties. Don't forget, the American Revolution just happened a decade ago. And the French are influenced by it. These people read in the papers what's going on in America. America won. America has this republic, and they're kind of anxiously watching to see if it's going to make it. The Estates General convened in 1789. The third estate refused to act until the king ordered the 2 other estates to meet with them. There's a 6-week standoff, and a few priests actually joined the third estate. Yeah, come on. All right. So the third estate, and basically what happens, the first and second estate say, let's meet for, let's take a lunch break and then we'll reconvene. And they basically locked the third estate out. So the third estate says, you know what? We're forming our own thing. And they declare themselves the National Assembly. And in June, this assembly moved to an indoor tennis court at the time and get something called the Tennis Court Oath. They swore to continue to meet until France had a new constitution. This pledge was called the Tennis Court Oath. Again, this is the third estate. All right. Now, things are going to get a little bit more radical here in the National Assembly phase. July 14th, 1789, they stormed the Bastille. The Bastille only has like 7 prisoners in it, but they're hoping to seize the weapons that are in there. The soldiers end up firing at the mob, but the mob they're going to win the day, and they're going to cut off the head of the man running the prison, and they're going to parade it around on the end of a pike. And this is the real deal. This is when Louis XVI realizes, hey, this isn't a revolt. This is a rebellion. All right. By July, there's a breakdown of law and order. The peasants are breaking into noblemen's manors. They quit paying taxes. They're killing nobles. Some of these émigrés, these nobles, they flee the country for their lives because the peasants have all gone crazy and they're killing rich people. The king accepted the National Assembly as a new government because he feels like he has to. The tricolor flag is adopted. He gives peasants hunting rights. I mean, you can see the kind of life that they live, that they don't have hunting rights, that is something reserved to the nobility. And the Declaration of Rights of Men and of the Citizens, very important. Heavily influenced, of course, by the Declaration of Independence from Thomas Jefferson. It listed basic human rights. All men are born free and equal in rights, but just like the Declaration of Independence, it sort of excluded women. All right. In response to that, Olympia de Gouges wrote a Declaration of Rights of Men and of Women. You forgot that part, guys. Declared women's rights to education, property within marriage, right to initiate divorce, all things denied to them. Of course, just because she declares it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but hey, it gets us started on that path. October 5th, 1789, the women march on Versailles, very famous march here. Over 100,000 women demanding bread for themselves and their families. They demand that King Louis move back to Paris. He's out there in Versailles, away from everything. They want him back in the middle of it. And really, in the third phase, the legislative assembly phase, we're going to get our three factions, which are pretty easy to remember. Conservatives, who sat on the right, they're loyal to the king. They want absolute monarchy. Radicals, who hate the conservatives, so you can't sit them next to each other, are going to sit on the left. They are ones who are talking republic, republic, republic. The moderates sit in the middle. They're the people who are really advocating for a constitutional monarchy. They're like, well, maybe some change, but not so much of a change as a republic. That's just going too far. All right, now the radicals are divided into two groups. The Jacobins, who want to overthrow monarchy and create a republic, so the radical, and the Giondrists, who wanted to involve France in a war that would discredit the monarchy and extend revolutionary ideas across Europe. That might be even more radical. All right, in June 21st, 1791, the royal family attempts to flee the country. And they're about 500 miles away from the border when Louis is recognized by his face on money. And they went incognito and in disguise, but he's recognized, they're arrested, and that will seal the deal for him and his family. Marie Antoinette's brother is King Leopold of Austria, and he threatened to send troops to France to restore order if other European nations joined him, because France is a powerhouse. Even with all this going on, they're still a powerhouse with a huge population. No one joins him. And Leopold dies unexpectedly, unfortunately for him and Marie Antoinette. The new French Constitution, the National Convention phase, went into effect in September 1st, 1791. The National Assembly achieved their tennis court oath and changed their name to the National Convention. So National Assembly to National Convention. France, you are confusing. All right, a wave of patriotism spreads throughout the country. And in September of 1792, France is declared a republic off of the slogan, life, liberty, and fraternity, brotherhood. All right, this new government is created. We get a new calendar. Began September 1792 as month number 1. The months were renamed according to seasons. They institute the metric system. It gets pretty wild. People now addressed as citizens, everyone being equal. And churches shut down and converted to temples of reason, secular, if you will. Religious celebrations and holidays were secularized. They even get rid of Sundays eventually. All right, National Convention is still divided. The Giondrist revolution has gone far enough. The Jacobins, certainly radicals, anyone who opposes the new government is anti-revolutionary. They get very rabid dog all of a sudden, the Jacobins do, especially under the leadership of Robespierre. All right, the working class people, the sans-culottes, those who wear the long pants, because these are trousers all the way down. Rich people wore culottes, which ended at the knee and are tight silk stockings, basically. They're pressing for more extreme measures. They got a taste of it and they want more. Here is Robespierre, and he is he's going to become a really bad dude. He institutes the Reign of Terror from 1793 to 1794. Radical Jacobins take over the National Convention under his leadership. and he does not like being questioned, let me tell you. He sought to eliminate all enemies of the Jacobins and established the Committee of Public Safety. That one's important. Between 20,000 and 40,000 people were guillotined from all three former estates. And it is by far the most violent period of the French Revolution. And this is over in America. This is shocking them. It's dividing Americans between, where their loyalties lay here. For many of them, it's just far too violent. King Louis XVI ends up getting executed for treason in 1793, and they would also later execute Marie Antoinette. Her daughter, Maria Therese, survived in Austria, and the son, Louis Charles, died in prison a year after his mother's death. So pretty sad story for them, although, they sort of had it coming, but, I hate that the kids had to suffer. All right. National Convention, the feminine symbol of the revolution, Marianne. They get a new constitution they never use. Members of the National Convention turned against Robespierre because, again, he is becoming mad with power. And in 1794, after about a year of running the show, Robespierre himself is executed and will be the last victim, really, of the guillotine in France. The revolt against Robespierre is called the Thermidorian reaction. Hot action. All right, France. Now we go into the Directory phase. France is now ruled by a committee of 5 men. Legislatures made up of 2 houses called the 500 and the Elders. In September of 97, a coup d'etat reduces to 3 members. You're crazy, France. The Directory ends up being overthrown by a young, successful general in 1799. You've probably heard of him, Napoleon Bonaparte. And Napoleon Bonaparte was urged by people to overthrow the Directory, this coup d'etat, and that will enter our Napoleonic era. Napoleon's fascinating historical individual. Born on the island of Corsica, he's not French, he's Italian for all intents and purposes. France took over Corsica just a couple of years before he was actually born. So his family were down on their luck, poor Italian nobles. He won a scholarship to attend this prestigious French military academy, where he was made fun of for his poor French. He didn't speak French very well at the time. He's going to end up marrying Josephine. She's 6 years older than him, so that was a little, scandalous sort of. But she was a divorcee with grown sons. In fact, I think her husband had lost his head to the guillotine. She helped him get a high-ranking military position. She does help him. Napoleon overthrows the Directory. Although his new government appeared to be democratic, he was really a dictator. And like it says here, or was he? He's not 5'2". He was about 5'6", about an inch higher than average height for a man in France in that century. All right, so Napoleon restores order, and he is a dictator. He's without a doubt a dictator, and I think it comes from his military background. He's a general who's used to saying something, giving a command, and people following it. A general, in a way, is a dictator. Says everyone must pay taxes. He establishes a national bank. He balances the budget. He establishes schools for all public boys, age 7 and up. He replaces the elected officials with his trusted friends and rewards them for their talents. So here you get good and bad. A lot of good right there in those first 3. And then you get sort of that patronage, spoil system thing. He's a man who wants to be surrounded by people he trusts. You may have elected these other people, but I don't trust them, and I have to have people that I can trust. So here, he's definitely showing he's not democratic. But so much good, he's fixing France, which is why people whispered in his ear to begin with. He was a rock star general out there who was known for his genius. And they said what France needs, because France has been through 10 years of misery and changing governments. And they whisper in his ear and they say, what France needs is you, general. You can fix France. And so he does it. There is some cost to freedom, though, with letting him fix it. Censorship, that's another thing that Napoleon does. He does not like criticism, and so he's going to make sure that the newspapers cannot critique him. He restores the church. He's not super religious, but he knows that the people were very upset that the churches were closed down, and so it's a play to the people. But regardless of his reasons, he does give the church back to the people. He restores them and religious holidays. He abandons the crazy old revolutionary calendar, but he does keep the metric system. In 1804, Napoleon declares himself emperor, and he had a lot of support from the people to declare himself emperor. Even though he grew up as a defender of the republic, and that's really where he came to fame, was defending the National Assembly from a unruly mob. That's how he gained his fame. He has decided that if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. So he has an extravagant coronation, this procession in the royal coach to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, crowned by the Pope, or at least the Pope's there. Napoleon will actually just crown himself. All right, imagery of Napoleon. Bees represent resurrection for some reason. Eagle is military victory. The hand of justice, his authority, and references to Caesar, of course, because we all love the Caesars. The laurel crown, the Roman column, and symbols of monarchy. His scepter, robe, throne, and chain. Some notable Napoleon quotes. A picture is worth 1,000 words. If you want something done well, do it yourself. That just sums Napoleon up to a T. A man will fight harder for his interest than his rights. His greatest legacy, of course, is the Napoleonic Code, which was divided into criminal code and civil code. Citizens are declared equal before the law. That's great. That's going to mean that nobles have to follow the same laws that the average person does. Freedom of religion. Chapular law forbids labor unions and strikes, however, so that's not as good. Men control the property. Women had no right to her own earnings. Not good either. Society during Napoleonic years. Moving upward in society requires education, money, and service to the state. It is possible to move up, which is good. That's social mobility. He is a military genius, and France is not enough for him. He does attempt to defeat Britain's navy in 1805, but loses at the very important Battle of Trafalgar to Lord Horatio Nelson. In revenge to this, he institutes something called the Continental System, which forces French allies to boycott British goods. He hopes to destroy their economy. Napoleon doesn't lose. He's only lost a couple of times on land, but the British have the greatest navy in the world. So he loses twice to Horatio Nelson, once in Egypt and once at Trafalgar. Trafalgar being the more important one, though. In 1805, he defeats Austria. In 1806, he dissolves the Holy Roman Empire, all those German principalities. In 1807 and 1808, he invades Spain. He's doing this he just rolls through Spain on his way to Portugal because Portugal's trading with Britain, and he is not happy with that, and he's about to go down there and teach them a lesson. Well, he forces the king to abdicate in Spain and places his brother Joseph on the throne. The Spanish people do not like this, and so they fight a guerrilla war against Napoleon that's going to kill upwards of like 600,000 French troops. In 1807, he signed a non-aggression pact with Tsar Alexander of Russia. Okay, that's interesting. Meanwhile, Napoleon has divorced Josephine, who has quite a few affairs on him. To be fair, he has affairs on her as well. She hasn't given him a male heir. She's past her childbearing years, and you can read Napoleon's love letters to Josephine, and they're almost sickening. They're so sappy. She definitely had it over him, but he has to have an heir, and so he always urges her to go on campaigns with him, and she never will. And so one day he just tells her, I'm done. He takes care of her, but he does divorce her, and he marries Marie Louise, who's 18 years old. He's 40 at the time, but what's she do? She gives him a male heir. And Napoleon Francois Joseph Charles. By 1812, Napoleon has ruled most of Europe, and you know what's coming. We've got to have that balance of power in Europe. He placed his brothers in ruling positions and conquered territories. There's you some spoil system for you. But then Tsar Alexander of Russia decides to sign a treaty with England, which betrays the pact with Napoleon. Napoleon married Marie Louise instead of the Tsar's sister. So there's some marital stuff going on here. Some tit for tat, if you will. Napoleon is very angry and he makes the greatest mistake of his life. He invades Russia. The numbers differ. This is the highest number I've ever seen for French troops. It's typically between 500 and 600,000 of the best French troops, the Grande Armée. And also the numbers here are a little different than what I've seen. Half died due to starvation, frostbite, and exposure to the cold. That's not, even the fighting. This is a disastrous expedition. He comes out. The common number I see is about 5,000. He only comes out with a little over 10,000 men. And these are his best troops. And the Russians they're not fighting a fair battle, if such a thing exists. They're killing the animals, the livestock. They're retreating. Napoleon is advancing. They're retreating. They're killing and burning everything so that the French don't have anything to eat. Their supply lines are getting bogged down from France, and people are beginning to starve. And they'll come in and they'll raid and they'll hit the flanks and all that stuff, but they won't face Napoleon on a field because they know they'll lose. But Napoleon makes it to Moscow, but the Russians set Moscow on fire. So he gets there, and what are you going to do? So he turns around and leaves. He gets absolutely nothing out of this campaign into Russia. They take far longer than what he had expected. Russian winter sets in, and his men start dying in droves. Napoleon's forced to abdicate his throne in 1814, even takes part in a failed suicide attempt. They exile him to Elba, where he gets to keep his title and income. Again, they don't want to make Napoleon a martyr. The British don't. And but what happens is that it sucks in France without him, and the people, want him back. Louis XVIII, the brother of Louis XVI, is restored to the throne in a constitutional monarch setting, but Napoleon will escape the island of Elba and returns and raises an army and regains power, but only for 100 days. And that's what it's called, the 100 days. Everybody teams up against Napoleon. Austria, Britain, Prussia, Russia. They defeat Napoleon at the iconic Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. The word Waterloo becomes synonymous with one's final defeat. This time he'll be exiled to St. Helena, where he'll be for 6 years before he dies from stomach cancer in 1821. All right, Congress of Vienna, after his final exile, what are we going to do now? Pre-Napoleon borders are restored. We're going to pretend basically that he wasn't there. Legitimate Bourbon monarchy was restored to France, so the Bourbons are back on the throne. England, Austria, Prussia, Russia, France form an alliance called the Concert of Europe. Harmony, basically. They want peace after all these wars. They agree to squash revolutions. Now, that's a key. Squash revolutions and maintain order. And a balance of power. No one nation can become too strong. Again, Napoleon dies 1821. All right, guys, that is it. That is very quick. There's so much to the French Revolution and Napoleon. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on it because it's fascinating. Big ideas here, though, that the causes of the French Revolution, money to America, debt, all the wars, bad harvest, extravagant spending of the monarchs, Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. And then when the people decide to rise up because the nobles and clergy aren't paying taxes, you get a very hardcore revolution, the roughest period being the 93 to 94 reign of terror under Maximilien Robespierre. But they'll turn on him because he's crazy. And, Napoleon will eventually overthrow the government in a coup d'etat, and he will rule as a dictator for a while there, and he will help get France righted. It will be at the expense of some rights, but he will right the ship and get France restored. Okay, thanks for listening.